All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the first round frenzy with Matt and Cole. And after last week, we talked about the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl, biggest risers. Today, we are going to be doing our first mock draft. Now, we both have our own mock drafts that we've done previously, but this one, we're going to do an alternating mock draft. So Cole's going to start. He's going to do the odds. I'm going to do the evens. And we're just going to get right into it, Cole. You ready?
All right, right off the bat, just like that.
And Cole is on the clock for the
All
Tennessee
right.
Titans.
So this is interesting. I mean, they could go quarterback. I don't know how high people are on Will Levis and, what's going on there. But the comments coming out of Tennessee I think a week ago, at least a couple of days ago, was that they're going to take a generational talent, and that is not someone that's a quarterback with this number one overall pick. So it's either, to me, the top two guys on the board right there, either Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter. And I think I'm going to go Abdul Carter, number one. Go ahead and lock it in. I think, with the Titans, what they want to do here is get a veteran quarterback, and just have a guy that can compete with Will Levis, and not bring in a rookie to compete with him because that I don't think does the franchise any good. So yeah, Abdul Carter, number one.
No, I completely agree. That's who I had going at number one as well. I just think one of the main issues with Tennessee is they've got that revolving door at right tackle. The
Yeah.
amount of hits that Will Levis took all season. I mean, I was never high on Will Levis. I don't think he's the future quarterback there. But I mean, you're just going to put another quarterback into the exact same situation, unless you make a big time free agent acquisition for your tackle. So at this point, let's start over, give Will Levis or a potential bridge quarterback a chance to do something and go get an edge rusher that's going to get you probably 10 plus sacks a season. So good pick there for the Titans. And now for me, Cleveland Browns. Obviously, the big news that Myles Garrett has requested a trade. And
Sorry to make things difficult for you. They are taking the top
yeah,
edge
yeah. So
rusher.
you took the edge rusher, which I expected, though. I think for the Titans, it makes sense to start in the trenches. And for me, I did the same thing, and I'm going with Travis Hunter out of Colorado.
Hmm.
Um, I just think with the state of the Browns right now, it's important for them to get a guy that can make an impact on both sides of the ball. I think they're losing a huge asset on the defensive side. And I think it makes the most sense for them to go and get a bridge quarterback right now, and not invest in someone for the future just yet. I mean, Travis Hunter, we talked about it with the Tennessee Titans. He's a generational prospect right now. I would assume he's going to be playing defense and playing probably 40 snaps a game on offense with the Cleveland Browns, as they have a decently deep secondary right now. But he's a guy that's going to make an impact on both sides of the ball. And if you get a Justin Fields type quarterback or maybe a Russell Wilson in there, he's going to be a huge help to them.
Yeah, or even the trade with Myles Garrett as well. Say they trade him to Atlanta and they get Kirk Cousins, pair Kirk
Yep.
Cousins at Kevin Stefanski offense.
Yeah. And
Then you can
also, I was,
pick best player on the board right now at
yeah. And
number two.
also, if you end up doing that trade and you get a first round pick back, you can go and get a guy later in the draft that you may end up liking. Maybe it's a Jackson Dart. Maybe it's I don't know. I've seen Will Howard get in the talks of first round picks. Like, you don't know with this QB class and what these teams are thinking. So go out there, get the arguably the best player in the draft and worry about the quarterback later. Or if you get one in free agency, obviously you figured it out before. But
Hmm.
I think Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter is 1-2, makes the most sense in terms of actual talent.
Yeah, and certainly the top two players on the board. All right, so New York Giants, the urgency's on. I mean, it's a short leash this year with Brian Dable, and Joe Schoen as well. So they need a quarterback. Everyone knows they're going to go quarterback. They lucked out here. Everyone talked about Drew Lock potentially screwing the team over late in the season out of getting a top quarterback. They got both quarterbacks on the board here, in Cam Ward and Shadur Sanders, but I'm actually going to go with Cam Ward. I know the Giants spent a lot of homework on Shadur Sanders, but I think Cam Ward fits the system that Brian DeBall is wanting to run there in New York. And if he wants to find immediate success, he needs a quarterback that he can come in day one and run his offense. And I think that's what Cam Ward does for the New York Giants.
Yeah, I think Cam Ward's the pick here. That's who I had going three as well in mine. I We just saw too much of Shador Sanders not being able to cope with pressure.
Hmm.
He's not a very athletic quarterback, and the Giants have been very well known over the past few years to not have the best offensive line. Lots of injuries, lots of disappointing seasons from guys, and Shador Sanders, if he goes to a team that has a top 10 offensive line, maybe he's going to be extremely successful. But with the New York Giants, job on the line for Schoen and Dabble, you're going to go with a guy that, if you can't build the perfect offensive line, is still going to be able to do something. And I think that's Cam Ward, not Shador Sanders.
Hmm.
So now we move to the New England Patriots. And for me, this one's really interesting because I think there are a bunch of different options here because they need someone everywhere. I think offensive line is a huge need for them. If Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter are somehow available, obviously they're going to go with that. But for me, I'm going to go ahead and give Drake May a target, and that's Tetero McMillan out of Arizona. Uh,
There you go.
I I think Drake May struggled with the receiving core that he had there, and I think all of the receivers that they currently have are very similar style players, and they're very different from McMillan, at least the ones with high potential. We saw McMillan just be able to high point a football, great route runner, extremely physical, better speed than I thought he was when I first watched him a few weeks ago. But I think he's a guy that's very similar. We've seen the comps to Drake London. I think he's probably a little bit more athletic than Drake London is, and better hands. So I think, sometimes we've seen in the past taking a receiver this high hasn't been very successful. But I think in this case, get Drake May a weapon that he can use and rely on. And then later in the draft, go ahead and go get an offensive lineman, or in free agency, get a veteran offensive lineman to protect him.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, you got to get some weapons here, and I like T. Higgins as a free agent option for them. But if they can't get that guy in free agency, McMillan's the best bet in the draft here. So now Jacksonville, things get interesting. No GM yet. We're still waiting on the GM announcement out of Jacksonville, but they found their new head coach. And now the top two skilled players, Travis Hunter, I'll throw him in there with McMillan as well off the board. I like skill with Liam Cohen coming in, but I'm actually going to go with the defensive guy here, beef up that defensive line with Mason Graham. I like that fit with that defense and what they're wanting to run there in Jacksonville, and he just adds a lot. Josh Hines Allen, he needs another guy, and they really need someone on the interior to rush the quarterback as well. Mason Graham out of Michigan, I really like what he can do there in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I got Mason Graham there as well. I have him. He's my number three player in the draft. So getting him at 5 is great for them. I think one of the other things that I was thinking, at least when I was making mine, was potentially going corner with Will Johnson, beef up that secondary a little bit. But I think the best thing to do is get a guy that can absolutely obliterate the run, but also get pressure on the quarterback. That defensive line is going to be one of the best in the league if you add Mason Graham to that with Trayvon Walker, Mason Graham, and Josh Hans Island. So I think that's the best thing, especially with an offense that's very sporadic and hasn't been very successful over the past few years. Get an offensive line, get a defensive line, sorry, that is going to be extremely disruptive, keep points off the board, and give your offense a chance. Now, at number 6 for the Raiders, this is Tom Brady's dream, from what we've heard. And we are going to go with QB Shador Sanders out of Colorado. There were a few different options here that I was thinking of. I was potentially thinking Ashton Genty really early, steal him from some of those other teams. Potentially going to Terrell McMillan if I didn't go with him with the Patriots. But now you go in there. Pete Carroll gets a quarterback that he gets to work with from the start. And Tom Brady gets a quarterback that he really likes the style of. Really tough, accurate passer, stays in the pocket. I think this is something that the Raiders would dream to happen. We'll see if he actually gets to 6 in the actual draft, but I think they'd be thrilled if this ends up happening.
Yeah, I mean that's everyone likes that fit. Everyone liked maybe Dion going
Yep.
to the Raiders as well if they were able to target Shadur. But with Pete Carroll, similar, I would like that. I would like to see what Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly could do with a quarterback like Shadur Sanders. I think that'd be a great fit for him in the NFL, and it's hard to find that for the style player he is and the limitations he has that he showed at Colorado. So I think it's a home run fit for a guy like that where he can land in the first round. Now with your Jets,
Yep.
Guza,
Let's
sorry
see
to
what you
take your
got.
team, but my guy was off the board here that I liked here, and Mason Graham. I had to take him early to Jacksonville. I liked him being with Aaron Glenn's defense, but last year they made a mistake. They made a mistake not taking Brock Bowers, who was a perennial Pro Bowler already. One of the best tight ends in the league as soon as he stepped on the field. Tyler Warren, they can't make that mistake again. Add this guy, a big body, reliable target for whoever your quarterback is, if it's Aaron Rodgers or you bring somebody else in. They need a tight end in New York, and Tyler Warren's the best one on the board this year, and he easily can be another top 10 tight end.
Yeah, I like Tyler Warren. That's not who I went with. I was between Will Campbell and Michael Williams.
Hmm.
I think Aaron Glenn personally is probably going to want a defensive player in the first round with his first pick. We'll see if that happens. But I like Tyler Warren. I think over the past few years, one thing that I've been saying consistently is the Jets need a tight end because a tight end is a young quarterback's best friend. And we've had Sam Darnold, we've had Zach Wilson. Both of them have struggled immensely because I mean the Jets were not a well put together team and they didn't have an outlet. And a tight end's that kind of guy that's going to run that underneath route, get open, and make something happen for you. And Tyler Warren's that kind of guy. And with the Jets' offense not put together yet, we have no idea if Aaron Rodgers is coming back. We have no idea who the quarterback's going to be. I think getting someone that can do everything on the offense is going to be huge. So I like the pick. Um, and hopefully he turns out well if we get him. Now at number 8, Carolina Panthers. Now this is kind of seems obvious based on everything that I've been reading. Pretty much everybody has the same player mocked here, and that's Jalen Walker out of Georgia, the linebacker edge rusher that I've seen. And I'm going to stick with it because I really like the kind of player that he is. He's able to play off ball linebacker, he's able to rush the quarterback. He's extremely athletic, extremely intelligent, and a good leader. And I think getting some versatility onto that Panthers defense is going to be huge, especially rushing the passer. They lost that when they traded away Brian Burns. So getting a guy back there that's going to be a leader on that defense and get production is going to be huge. I mean, there are some other options here. You could go Will Johnson, you could go James Pierce Jr., Mike Green, but I think Jalen Walker is potentially the best overall player between the three of them and has the highest floor. So that's why I go Jalen Walker here, safe pick and productive.
Yeah, I mean, that's like you said, a consensus mock, it seems like, with the Panthers. I mean, he's definitely a Dan Morgan guy, and they need someone on the other side of Jadeveon Clowney to eventually take over that role as being their number one threat since losing Brian Burns. Another one that's, like I said, a good fit. The Saints, this gets interesting. No one wants to coach there. No one seemingly wants to play there. Um, I have different options here. I literally had three different players who I wanted for the Saints. All three are on the board. I like Will Campbell. I like building up the offensive line. I like Will Johnson and Benjamin Morrison building up the secondary as well. And probably the direction I'll go with. I think I'll go, my second Michigan guy I'm taking, but I think I'm going to go with Will Johnson. I think they need to find, that guy that can step in and replace Marshawn Lattimore on that defense in the secondary. They might lose Paulson Adebo in free agency as well. A lot of teams like him. So I think corner is probably arguably their biggest need on the roster going into next season.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, the Saints they allowed 238 passing yards a game last season, which was I believe sixth highest in the league. That I was going between him and potentially Luther Burden out of Missouri. I think
Hmm.
Chris Olave's health has become a big question mark. But I ended up going with Luther Burden in my mock draft. But I was very much in between Will Johnson and Burden. It'll be interesting to see in a few weeks when the combine comes up. We're going to have an episode or 2 episodes talking about the combine. And that's going to be a huge day for Will Johnson.
Definitely.
A lot of people are talking about questions about his speed, what he's going to run in the 40. I haven't heard if he's going to run the 40 or not. I would assume he is. But I mean, the difference between like a high 4.4 and a low 4.5 is going to be the difference between getting picked potentially top 5 to potentially dropping to 15 or 16. So
Mhm.
it'll be interesting to see here, but I like the pick. He was my original mock to the Saints. Now at 10, you and I have talked about this, about what the Bears should do at 10. And is it go Ashton Genty or is it go offensive line? And for me, I've gone offensive line. Now, I'm going to make a little bit of a change, I believe, to my mock draft, as I originally had Will Campbell going to the Jets and Kelvin Banks Jr. going to the Bears. But I'm going to switch that and I'm going to go Will Campbell. I think, obviously, um, wasn't it? Caleb Williams
Yeah.
had his own issues with getting sacks, but that offensive line has a lot of holes, whether it's on the offensive tackle position or in the interior. Will Campbell's another guy. Come combine time, measurements are going to be key. What's going to happen based on the tape? He looks like he can be an all pro left tackle, guy that's going to sit there for 10, 15 years on your team. But if he ends up having to move to the inside and he ends up becoming an all pro guard, I mean, there's no loss there. And I think although Ashton Genty is by far the best running back in this class based on his collegiate tape, I think this class is so deep at the running back position that you got to go when the top offensive tackle is available on the board, go get him, protect your franchise quarterback, and get the running back in either round 2 or round 3. So I end up going Will Campbell.
Yeah, and this is a team that's going to replace 3 to 4 offensive linemen
Yep.
this year or into next year. That unit's going to look completely different. Darnell Wright's going to be the only one standing that was on the, Caleb Williams rookie offensive front. And, Will Campbell can start day one at left guard and even compete long term, like you said, at left tackle with Braxton Jones.
Yep.
So
Perfect.
I like that one as well. I like him a lot better as a fit than Kelvin Banks. So for the 49ers, I think this is an easy pick. They're losing a lot of depth in the secondary. I like Malachi Starks. I'm just going to go ahead and go quick. I think they're going to run on the board and get this guy. The Georgia defenders have been incredible as of late, and I think he's the next guy that's really going to step up. And Shanahan, he no matter who his defensive coordinator is, that secondary is always high flying, opportunistic, and Malachi Starks is going to fit right in with the rest of that unit and be an incredible player for that team.
Yeah, I think he'd be a great fit there. I ended up going Will Johnson in mine. I think
Yeah,
it'll be
either
interesting.
way, yeah.
I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with guys like Malachi Starks, Jade Barron, Nick Emanwari. We saw very similar style players uh, to Brian Branch, right? And Brian Branch ended up dropping to the second round just because of positional value. Obviously, Brian Branch is an amazing NFL player. I know both of us were very high on him in that draft class. I'm very high on Malachi Starks as well. I think this would be a great pick for the 49ers, but we'll see if this ends up being the pick because I mean, you're going to see some potential guys drop down here and do they go with a corner over the safety? It'll be interesting, but I really like the pick of Malachi Starks there. Now at 12, Ashton Genty keeps falling, man. I love
Positional value.
Genty, but positional value is real. And I think the Cowboys have some other glaring needs at the wide receiver position. And that is where I'm going to go with the hometown kid right out of Texas, Matthew Golden, who has flown up draft boards the last few weeks. People are raving about him. As you know, Texas fan here. I loved watching him all season. He was absolutely amazing. And I think he'd be a great fit. I think, you know, CeeDee Lamb, obviously, number one target there. And then you got Jalen Tolbert, who had a good season this year, but is he really that number 2 option that you want in your offense? Probably not. So if you don't go out there and make a splash in free agency and get a guy like T. Higgins or of someone of that quality, why not go out there, get a top 5 wide receiver in this draft class and bring him into your team. Give Dak another target for another weapon to use. And I same thing with the Chicago Bears. I think there's plenty of value at the running back position later on. I mean, I've got so many running backs graded highly this year that they will be able to find their guy. Is he going to be the same quality as Ashton Genty? I don't know, but I think it's important to go and get your guys early on.
Yeah, and I think it's the wide receiver room especially is going to be how it was last year. Every team is going to evaluate and rank these guys differently.
Yep.
I mean, the Bears had Rome Odunze as one of their top guys, and he fell to him right there at 9. The Jaguars from day one, they knew Brian Thomas was going to be their guy,
Yep.
and they stayed put and they waited and they got him. So I definitely could see Dallas getting Matthew Golden here and being very comfortable making that early pick. A little bit of a reach on some teams' boards, but if their board falls that way and he's their guy, yeah, you take him.
Yep.
All right, so Miami. Uh, Different ways to go here. I do think I don't know what's going to happen with Bradley Chubb coming back. He could be a cut or trade candidate. I like some of the edge rushers here, James Pierce, Mike Green. But I think, you got to build up some support for Tua. And long term, I like Armand Imbo out of Missouri as a fit here. You can put him at tackle, you can put him at guard. Either way, I mean, both are needs. And Chris Greer talked heavily about how they need to improve the offensive line. They're not going to, pass on that position in the first round.
Yeah. I mean, it's the Armand Membo's an interesting one. He's again, I think we've seen this a lot in this draft class. Is a lot of these offensive tackles are going to be moving to the inside. We already
Hmm.
saw it with Zabel. We saw it with Milam. We're potentially seeing it with Banks, Savanaya, and uh,
Will Campbell.
Campbell. So it's going to be interesting to see how they go. I actually, and also, I think there's a lot. It's very similar with the wide receiver class this year, as there's a lot of difference in opinion based on who's the top guy, who's not. Right now, I've got him, I believe, as my offensive tackle 6. So he's my first pick in the second round right now. But he's another guy that I was thinking about potentially putting him here or potentially to the Cardinals as well when I was mocking this. So he's a great option for the Dolphins. And I had Tyler Booker mock there. So I think offensive line is definitely the move for
Well, I'll get the Armand train going a little early then.
now 14. You stole my guy, Tyler Warren. If he goes to the Jets, I'll be perfectly happy. But I thought he was the perfect fit for the Colts. My second choice, you also stole Malachi Starks. So now I've got to go all the way down to my number 3 option. And I'm sorry, Harbaugh. Colston Loveland is going
Oh,
to the Indianapolis Colts. And I had him mocked to the Colts, to the Chargers. But I think getting Anthony Richardson, a big time weapon at the tight end position, is extremely important. Loveland, extremely athletic, can play out of the slot, can play on the line. And he's going to be a big time player. And I was considering potentially going with Jahdae Barron here, going defense, get like a nickel, potentially play outside as well. But I think that offense needs a lot of help. So I'm gonna give Anthony Richardson a weapon.
yeah, and I think secondary is going to be a big priority for them in free agency.
Yep.
So yeah, this is a great pick. Like you said, they're going to get a guy that they're high on that can help that elevate that offense even more. So I like it. All right, so the Falcons, Genty's still falling, but we're not gonna make a nightmare pairing of him and Bijan Robinson here, so we'll have him fall again. You took my guy. Oh, actually, no, you didn't take him. All right, Luther Burden.
Okay.
I'm gonna take him. He's still on the board. So another receiver off the board. I'm gonna give Michael Penix another target here, having him, Darnell Mooney, Kyle Pitts, maybe if they keep him around and also Drake London. I mean, the firepower on that Falcons offense will be incredible for Michael Penix to, really come into his own in his sophomore year and really first full year as a starter. Just keep loading up the talent on that side of the ball.
Yeah, 100%. I think it'll be really interesting to see which way the Falcons go here. I think it's wide receiver or edge rusher. It's one of the two. I think those are going to be the only guys they're looking at
How many
in this
years are
class.
we gonna say edge rusher for the Falcons and
I
not
know
have them go
it's
edge rusher?
but it's just it has to happen at some point, like at some point they got to get their guy. Um, and it'll be interesting to see. It's going to obviously depend on who's available. But I like the Luther Burden pick. I was contemplating between James Pierce Jr. and Luther Burden with this pick, and I ended up going James Pierce Jr. Um, but yeah, I mean Penix is going to need weapons. I think we've seen over the past few seasons drops have been an issue in Atlanta. And outside of London and Pitts, there's not much there in the passing game. A lot of just put together random players that come in from everywhere. So getting a guy that can really do everything, gadget guy, is going to be huge for them.
That's enough
Yep.
to Ray McLeod disrespect, Uza. That's strike
Hey,
one.
you know what? People have their place. Ray McLeod's great, but he's like a wide receiver four, wide receiver three, maybe. So go out there and get yourself a true wide receiver too. All right, so number 16. Originally, I had my guy Jade Barron going there. But after you go Armand Membu to the Dolphins, I'm going to go and get the guy that I played with in middle school, Tyler Booker, Alabama,
Mm.
to go to the Cardinals. I think Cardinals are a team that, again, have a lot of needs. We could see them go wide receiver. We could see them go offensive line. We could see them go secondary. We could see them go on the defensive line. I think they're a team that is close to being able to potentially compete in the NFC West, but they still have a lot of holes. And I feel like they are losing some key pieces in free agency this year. So going to get a guy that is absolutely massive. He's great in pass protection, a good run blocker, and he's a great leader as well. So getting that guy onto the offensive line for Kyler Murray is going to be huge. Because I think protecting Kyler Murray at this point is going to be what's needed. Hopefully, Marvin Harrison Jr. takes a big step up this year. Obviously, hopefully, Trey McBride becomes more productive in the red zone this year. But protecting Kyler Murray is going to be the biggest need right now.
Yeah, and we still got Kelvin Banks on the board, and it always happens. Someone's gonna fall, so don't bat too many eyes at this,
Yep.
because I'm gonna take him off the board here.
There we go.
The Cincinnati Bengals, you got to protect Joe Burrow, and as much as I want to give him a weapon to replace T. Higgins, in that offense, bring in someone like Amika out of Ohio State. That's who I had on there, but I didn't have Kelvin Banks sitting here on the board. So I'm gonna have to go, with making that decision and take Kelvin Banks here. Like you said, a guy whose measurables will be important come combine time if you're gonna put him at guard or tackle. Either way, he's an instant improvement to help keep Joe Burrow up and in the pocket.
Yeah, 100%. Kelvin Banks is a guy that I expect to go in the top 15. I think it'll obviously depend. I think do the Jets go offensive line? Do the Patriots go offensive line? There's a lot of potential offensive line needy teams. Obviously, we did not go with the offensive line in those situations, but it'll be interesting because the Bengals need defense. They need a lot of help on that defense. So to use a high draft pick here on an offensive lineman, although important because you got to protect Joe Burrow, it'll be interesting to see if they end up going that way or if they end up making an impact player on defense.
Mhm.
So next up is the Seattle Seahawks. And this is a team that now has a few options on my board based on how I was going that I was not expecting to be here. I'm going defense 100%. I'm looking at James Pierce. I'm looking at Mike Green. I'm looking at Michael Williams. And I'm looking at Walter Nolan in particular. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick with what I was going to go with, and that is Michael Williams to the Seattle Seahawks. I think they're a team that just need help in the trenches, whether it's offensive line or defensive line. I think if Kelvin Banks was still here, I might have gone Kelvin Banks. But without him there, go Michael Williams. Great in run defense, can get after the quarterback. I think he needs a little coaching up on being able to rush the passer a little bit more efficiently. But I think this is a good pick here, guy that's going to be extremely disruptive on that defensive line.
Yeah, and a young developmental guy too to rotate in that front in Seattle. Mike McDonald will love working with that guy. All right, so he's off the board. Michael Williams, Tampa Bay. Let's see what we got. That's who. Oh, that's my number one guy was Michael Williams. All right, I'll switch it. James Pierce is there. I'll get him. That's their number one needs, finding an edge rusher. They got some guys on offense. Their offense looked really good, but they didn't have anybody on the defense that can, absolutely wreck a game. And that was the downfall of their season. They did not have someone in that game against Washington that could stop Jane Daniels in that offense and be a game wrecker on the defensive side of the ball. James Pierce, he's got that written all over him.
I ended up with mine. I ended up going best available, which was Malachi Starks. Obviously not available here. But James Pierce, I also had going at 15. So this is a good pick for them. Get someone that can get after the quarterback. I like that move. Now is finally the time. Ashton Genty is coming
Uh,
off the board
I figured he'd go here.
to the Denver Broncos. I think it's about time. Both top tight ends are off the board, which, obviously a potential option for the Broncos. But I think there's been a lot of question marks regarding their running back room. They've been doing it by committee. Javonte Williams, extremely inconsistent, although very, a lot of potential out of UNC. And they've had some other guys that come up, have some sparks of potential, but nothing consistent. So they're going to go get a guy, be able to take some pressure off of Bo Nix in that passing game. They've got a good offensive line. Obviously, they've got one of the best defenses in the NFL, so they don't need to waste a high pick on any of those players there. Go and get the best player still left on my board. That's Ashton Genty, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory there.
Yeah, and it seemed like today, hearing Sean Payton down in New Orleans talk, that they want a consistent guy that can be a weapon. And he said that they want, a legit receiver. Here, that's Ashton Genty is a legit offensive weapon, and no matter how you use him. So that's a good pick.
All right.
So the next, right, so for the Pittsburgh Steelers, some of the edge rushers I liked here off the board. I like them going another corner to pair with Joey Porter Jr., but the big thing last year was finding someone not named George Pickens on offense. They didn't find him. They tried to get Brandon Ayuk. They tried every name that you could possibly think of as a trade target and landed none of them. Their best bet here is going to be through the draft. I'm going to take Emeka Egbuka here out of Ohio State. Pair him with George Pickens. I don't know who their quarterback's going to be. They like Fields. They like Wilson. They're going to keep one of the two. And if they keep Justin Fields, which is leaning that way, give him an Ohio State guy to pair back up with. I like him, and his game translates perfectly with how George Pickens operates as well with that offense.
I like that. That's who I had as well. I mean, Emeka Egbuka is one of my favorite players in the draft. Um, and I think it'll be really interesting if they end up going with this. Um, and I just really like it. They need another receiver. Obviously, quarterback's a question mark. They haven't been extremely consistent. George Pickens also not extremely consistent either. So to get a guy that one of the best receivers in Ohio State football history in terms of actual production, get a guy there extremely consistent with the ball in his hands, good yards after catch guy as well. I really like that pick there. Now the Chargers is an interesting one.
Because you took their guy.
Because Tyler Warren's off the board, Ashton Genty's off the board, Colston
Colston
Loveland's
Loveland's
off
off
the
the
board.
board.
And this is exactly why I could see Harbaugh trading up to make sure that he gets this guy. But for me, I I don't really know if I'm in the situation here with the Chargers. I don't really know what you go with here. Um, my next guy was Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver, but obviously I had him going uh, there. So I think the next best option is I don't really know. It's
Such as the draft.
it's this is a tough predicament. It'll be interesting to see what the Chargers end up doing if this is what happens. But I think I'm. What am I going to do? I'm going to go with. I think I'm just going to go with best player available on my board here. and that is gonna be Jahdae Barron out of Texas. Um, I think the Chargers could end up trading back here. They could trade up to get their guy. I think this is a little bit too high to reach on some of those other tight ends like Elijah Arroyo, Mason Taylor, Harold Fannin Jr. So I think if the Chargers get to this situation, maybe they like a guy like Mike Green, go edge rusher. Maybe they like a guy like Walter Nolan, go interior. Um, I think getting a guy, I think Jahdae Barron is going to be one of the best players that come out of this draft. He can pretty much play anywhere. He can play nickel. He can play up top safety. He can play outside corner. And I think he's one of the most consistent players in the draft. And he showed it this past season at Texas. So I'm just going best available. But yeah, that's what I go with the Chargers.
Yeah, and I think depending on what happens with Khalil Mack and also, Joey
Yep.
Bosa, his long-term future with the team, I would have liked Mike Green there. The first on, the top of our ranking, or even a Shamar Stewart off the edge. But it just depends. They bring back Khalil Mack, you still have two, potential top, defensive ends if the two, both of them could stay healthy. But yeah, I think a long-term guy there works. But I mean, helping the secondary also. I mean, there's no rhyme a reason not to get corners, especially some good ones. All right. This might be one of the first times you won't see me draft a wide receiver to the Green Bay Packers in the first round. I have learned my lesson. So, and also from what Brian Gutekunst talked about in his end of season press conference, he was not happy with the production of his defensive line. He's put a lot of investment in there. Drafted Devontae Wyatt in the first round, drafted Rashawn Gary in the first round, drafted Lucas Van Ness in the first round. There was no reason for none of those guys to show up.
Yep.
They immediately fired their defensive line coach as soon as the season ended. I'm gonna go Nick Scourton out of Texas A&M, an impact guy who can be a leader for that defensive front. And, then that rotation, it picks up from there. But you get Rashawn Gary on one side and Nick Scourton on the other side. And then you start mixing in Lucas Van Ness, Brenton Cox and some of those other guys that were role players last year in that same role. But they just need another guy that can step up on the other side of the defensive front.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think trenches is the way to go. I had them going Josh Simmons out of Ohio State at tackle. But Nick Scourton is a guy that's been moving up my board personally. Originally, I didn't think very high of him or Shamar Stewart, but they've both kind of slowly been rising up it. Um, I was very tempted here. I've got the Minnesota Vikings, and I was very tempted here to make both of you guys choose the same position again and see who comes out on top. Um, and for me, I am going to go. Originally, I had Derek Harmon out of Oregon, but now I'm going to go Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss. I think interior defensive line is a big need for them. Disrupt the run, get to the passer. Walter Nolan's one of my favorite players in this draft, and I think having him drop into the 20s is going to be a steal for whoever gets him. I believe I originally had him mocked to the Bengals. Yeah, the Bengals at 17. So I don't think the Vikings will think twice when they see him on the board here at 24.
Yeah, I mean, interior of that defensive front is definitely a big need for that team. The Houston Texans, on the other hand, their biggest needs on the offensive. I liked Walter Nolan here, but he just went off the board. They're going to be upset about that. But I need to, they need to get some help on the offensive line, especially what we saw trying to protect C.J. Stroud last year. I think their two tackles are set. I'm going to go Gray Zabel here. This is where I think he enters into the first round.
Yep, I had Gray
You
Zabel to the Texans as well. That's exactly
they've
what I was thinking.
had a revolving door at center in Houston. This is the position this guy is best suited for, even a guard as well. Just that Texans offensive front really needs someone that can come in and overhaul and be a versatile guy for them. So that's we got him in the first round. NDSU boy off the board.
I like it. So yeah, no, I agree. CJ Stroud obviously had a really tough time this past season. A lot of it had to do with people getting to him. And the offensive line really needs help. Gray Zabel, obviously the guy I went with as well. Good pick there. Now the Rams, I think they end up going offensive line here. I've got here as like my fifth option, Will Howard, but I don't think that's going to happen. And I originally had Josh Connerly out of Oregon here, but I think I'm actually going to go with Josh Simmons out of Ohio State. I think Josh Simmons is a guy that I have ranked above Connerly. I think injury issues um, are present, but I think he's a guy that if he remains healthy, he's going to be an elite. He could potentially be the best offensive tackle in this entire class. So getting him all the way down at pick 26 would be huge value. I at one point I had him as a top 10 player in this entire class. He's dropped down a little bit, but I think this would be a massive win for Matt Stafford or whoever ends up being the quarterback of this team next season.
Well, cut to the Baltimore Ravens, Matt. Their entire draft room just slammed their hands onto the table. That was my guy I had there. But next up on my list was Josh Connerly. They're losing Ronnie Stanley in free agency. Josh Jones is walking as well. That's a big depth loss they're going to have on the offensive line at the tackle position. So I'm just going to go next guy off the board in Oregon here, and get a tackle. Just fills a need that they're losing. Long-term guy with Lamar Jackson, but man, they would have loved to have Josh Simmons with that pick.
That would have been great for them. I actually had his teammate Donovan Jackson mocked to them. I'm really high on him. Obviously, interior offensive lineman that did an amazing job filling in for Josh Simmons when he was injured at left tackle. But Josh Connerly is, other than that one very unfortunate situation that happened at the Senior Bowl, he has been absolutely amazing. Can play on the left or the right. I think he's probably better on the left than he is on the right, but he's a versatile guy. Get a guy there to protect Lamar. Great. I think offensive line is the way to go there. Now, Detroit. This is an interesting one. I think there are a lot of quality players here that I'm choosing between. Mike Green is obviously the one that has fallen a lot,
hmm Yeah, I think they like him a lot in Detroit too.
and they like him a lot. The question is, as of right now, I think I'm going to go Mike Green, and that's what I'm going to go with. But that is
Yeah,
going to change if they don't have to give this pickup and they go and get Myles Garrett. I
yeah,
was originally going with Kenneth Grant, the teammate of Aiden Hutchinson, to go there. Actually, if I did a 3-round mock draft the other day, and I had Kenneth Grant and Josiah Stewart both going to the Detroit Lions. So 3 Michigan boys up on that defensive line. But obviously, Mike Green could potentially be the best edge rusher in this entire class when it's all said and done. Obviously, Abdul Carter is an elite athlete, but from what we've seen, the floor, like, it's Mike Green is outstanding. So
yeah.
I think Detroit would be ecstatic if he fell to them at 28. So I'm gonna go there. Him and Aiden Hutchinson would be an elite pass rush duo.
Yeah, and it seems like that's something they're really trying hard. They tried to get Zadarius Smith last year to come in. He couldn't step up and be that guy after they lost Hutch. And Mike Green, man, Dan Campbell's gonna be sitting in that room, go, hey man, this guy had 17 sacks last season. Why is he sitting on the board right here? That's a great pick. I mean, he's got Dan Campbell energy written all over him for that defensive line.
100%.
Washington, Washington, Washington. A lot of things they can do here. I think they're going to be a very active team. I mean, getting to the NFC Championship game with a first year head coach, or not first year head coach, but first time, a new head coach coming
New
in,
head coach, yeah.
his first year in Washington, with the rookie quarterback, they're going to load up and try to make it a run as quickly as possible. So what do they fill in? I think they go out and get a big wide receiver or, potentially a Myles Garrett. They're going to make some kind of splash. But in terms of the draft, I'm going to go with probably one of the corners here. I like Trey Amos, but I'm going to go Siobhan Revell out of East Carolina.
That's who I had as
Um,
well.
I like Mike Sandestrill, but man, that trade getting Marshawn Lattimore just did not pay off for that team.
No,
And that's the risk you have trying to trade for a guy mid-season. They usually don't pan out. And long term, how long will Marshawn Lattimore stay there? Just get a guy like Revel in there. Just some, reassurance at a key position for that defense.
100%. I think corner is obviously a huge need for them. One of the worst pass defenses in the league at one point. So that's a huge need, and I agree. I think they're most likely going to go on after offense and free agency, and I think that's where they're going to potentially get their guy at receiver. And with the top four guys off the board or five guys, I forget how many we've drafted at this point, but with those guys off the board, the big names off the board, I think you have to go corner. It'll be interesting to see. This is all going to change once we get to the combine, I think. But it'll be interesting to see. Is it Benjamin Morrison? Is it Azariah Thomas? Is it Shavon Revel? Maxwell Harrison potentially getting into this first round. It'll be interesting to see. I think it's kind of wide open to that corner position. I was thinking about this earlier. I think we could see anywhere from 3 to 7 corners go outside of Travis Hunter go in this first round. And I think it's all going to come down to what the combine says. You know, there's a lot of guys
Yeah,
relying on arm length here. There's a lot of guys relying on weight. There's a lot of guys relying on that 40 time. And that is going to either, like, I mean, we were talking about Will Johnson. I mean, he could be the fourth pick or he could be like pick 17.
yeah,
So
be the third corner potentially.
it'll be really interesting to see how these corners fall because I mean Shavon Revel and Benjamin Morrison both coming off of injuries. Uh, it's going to be really interesting to see how teams value these different players. But I also had Shavon Revel there to Washington. Now, the Buffalo Bills, they're an interesting team here. But I think they have one very glaring need, and that is get someone for Josh Allen to throw the football to. And I would love for it to be a T. Higgins. I would love for T. Higgins to head to Buffalo and give Josh Allen a big target, but they don't have it. If they do end up going out and getting that guy, I love a Kenneth Grant. I love a Tyleek Williams. Get someone on that interior of the defensive line to disrupt the run. But right now, I'm going to do a little bit of a reach here. He's one of my favorite guys, and that is going to be Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State.
Mm.
We always see one guy, doesn't matter the position, that ends up coming into the first round that you don't expect to be there. And I think Jaden Higgins could potentially be that guy for Buffalo because they are desperately needing someone on that offense as a weapon for Josh Allen. So it'll be interesting to see how free agency goes, what they do there. Is Amari Cooper with the team still? Do they go out and get a guy like T. Higgins? Do they trade up to potentially get one of the top wide receivers? It'll be really interesting. But right now, I've got Jaden Higgins mocked to the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, and I feel like if that's who they're looking at, and if that's their guy, I can see them doing a move like they did last year, where you move back a pick or two,
Yep.
or even back into the top end of the second round. Just Brandon Bean likes to move around and then still end up with his guy and try to look smart. So I mean, I last year getting Keenan Coleman, I was not that surprised me. Was not expecting that.
Yeah.
And the way they moved back to get him and let the Chiefs come up and get Xavier Worthy and just how that situation worked out. Brandon Beane's a weird guy and how he operates in the first round.
I was going to
Um,
say, I think it'll be really interesting. I think moving is probably what's going to happen with Buffalo. If the draft goes as we're talking about here, I think there could be a lot of movement. I mean, we already talked about the Chargers potentially moving. I think there could be a lot of calls to Tennessee. I mean, obviously, I think they're going to end up keeping it and taking that. But do a New York Giants move up to make sure they get a guy? Do the Raiders move up to make sure they get their guy? Does a surprise team do it? But I think there could be potentially a lot of movement, and I think Buffalo could be one of those teams that ends up moving.
all right, so now the Eagles. They got a couple different things here. I like the way this board fell for the Eagles. Shocking. That happens every year.
Yeah, every year.
They look out. But I like Benjamin Morrison. I like Shamar Stewart. Trying to figure out here because they got a couple guys leaving free agency. Josh Sweat. That makes me like Shamar Stewart. But now we're hearing news that Big Play Slay might be retiring after the 2025 season. That I come back to Benjamin Morrison a little bit here. It's between these two guys for me. And I think I'm probably going to go with the corner, get Benjamin Morrison here. They like investing a lot and having multiple guys in that secondary to rotate. They drafted two last year. and Quinyon Mitchell in the first round, and then got Cooper DeJean in the second round. And just keep building up that strength. I mean, you're only as good as your secondary is. And if your secondary is locked down and can shut down any offense you face, the Eagles are going to keep being in the spot they're in later this weekend for years to come.
It'll be really interesting to see what the Eagles do here. I had them going edge. I think Shamar Stewart to the Eagles would be a match made in
Killer.
heaven.
Yeah,
I think the
killer.
way that I think the way that they develop their defensive linemen is outstanding. And I think the big issue with Shamar Stewart is he didn't have production in college. He needs development on technique, be able to get to the quarterback and actually get the sack. And I think the Eagles could do that. So I like Benjamin Morrison, especially if Slay ends up leaving. But I think it's corner or edge, one of the two.
Yeah.
Now for the Chiefs are always so weird, man. I mean, they could do anything here. I mean, I could see them picking Cam Scatterbo at 32 here because they want to
Like when they
gadget
got Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the
guy.
first
Like,
round.
it's like I think personally, I think they get Cam Scatterbo at some point in this draft, and I think they get Jack Betch at some point in this draft because those seem like the most Chiefs guys I've ever seen. But I think the big need here, based on who's available, is interior defensive line. I think they need a little bit of help there. It's between most likely Tyleik Williams or Kenneth Grant. I'm going to stick with what I mocked. I think you can go either way here. I'm going to go Tyleik Williams just because that's who I had mocked originally. I like Kenneth Grant, big body guy there. But, I like it. I think it's definitely an interesting draft here. Here's the final board, 1 through 32. Cole, what stands out to you here?
Definitely, people with the consensus. I mean, Kelvin Banks falling to 17. You got Ashton Genty falling to 20. And there's another one in there. Josh Simmons falling pretty low. Mike Green, all the buzz he's getting still falling late first round. These guys aren't going to fall where people say they will. I mean, there's always things that happen and, things that come up and all the things, going in. There's a long time between now and April. And things aren't going to look the way you think they will. And I mean, Matthew Golden, there's always the reaches as well when teams like their guy. So I think in terms of, we've been doing this for a while now. This looks pretty good in my opinion of what we probably will see come April.
Yeah. And, we're going to do this, I believe, 2 more times. We're going to do it, I believe, next week, starting Monday. We're going to start going through our position groups. So we've got offensive tackles and interior offensive linemen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Got the combine. Then we've got our big board reveal, which we'll each do, we'll probably do it in 2 parts. We'll each do our 25s and then so on. And then we've got the next one, next mock draft. And then the day before the draft, we'll release one more. So I think we are going to see some people not move at all. And then we're going to see some people that could end up going out of the first round completely. We could see someone random pop into the first round. It's really interesting. And also free agency obviously changes a lot as well. So there's going to be, this is close, but I think you're going to see a different board come March when we do our mock draft 2.0.
Yeah, for sure. Always going to be some changes.
Yep. So anyway, that's it for us here. This is the mock draft. Obviously, if you're listening on Spotify, you're not seeing the mock draft. So hopefully your memory is good. But go check it out on YouTube if you want to see it. Monday, we've got offensive tackles and interior offensive linemen. And then I believe we've got edge rushers and interior defensive linemen next Thursday. So that's what you got next week. And Cole, I will talk to you then.
Yep, I'll see you then.
See ya.